Hello, I'm Michael L. Harris, and this is Indiana Roadside Markers. Today I'm at the corner of Detroit and Buffalo Streets in Warsaw, Indiana, and the location of the marker commemorating the Cowen Seminary. The marker states that this was the site of the Cowen Seminary from 1851 to 1876, one of the first secondary schools in the area. Built at the call of the Presbyterian Church by Robert Cowen and his wife Jane Cowen, head mistress. A fire of unknown origin burned the seminary to the ground in December of 1879. This marker replaces the original marker commemorating the site. The current marker was installed a half a block away from the site where it was originally installed. On March 17, 1851, J. Whitter Baxter, president of an Indiana educational institution, representing a committee which included several prominent area businessmen, wrote to Jane Cowen encouraging her to come to Warsaw and open a school. Baxter writes that the leading men of the place are supportive of the endeavor and that a room has already been secured for the purpose. Baxter further states that there are about 125 potential students in Warsaw alone and nearly 2,500 throughout the county, and therefore there is no better place in northern Indiana to open a school since no school higher than a common district school now exists. It appears that the Cowens readily accepted Baxter's offer. Robert arrived in Warsaw by horseback shortly thereafter and selected a piece of ground on which to build a permanent structure for the school. He selected an area about a mile from the center of Warsaw, a perfect square at the end of a cowpath. After clearing the red brush from the land, which he had purchased, he built a two-story structure, a secondary school known at the time by various names, but most commonly as Mrs. Cowen's Seminary. Sometime after selecting the land, and presumably before beginning construction, Robert returned to Logansport in order to accompany his wife Jane to Warsaw. Jane and her husband arrived in Warsaw from Logansport via horse and wagon on May 5, 1851, 5 years before the Pennsylvania Railroad was built. There were beautiful oak trees on the property, which is why it was sometimes referred to as the Grove School. The building was built of heavy hand-hewn timbers. The lime for the plaster was hauled from Huntington, and crude desks and seats were made from plain, unpainted boards. Along the north side of the schoolroom was a narrow raised platform. Above this was a blackboard. Erasers were made from sheepskin, tacked to pieces of wood, and chalk was used until crayons were invented. Big windows let in plenty of sunlight. Squirrels and birds played among the grapevines and oak trees outside of the school windows. While Robert was busy building the permanent structure, Jane first opened the school in a frame building, which stood on the southeast corner of Buffalo and Jefferson Streets, apparently the location Baxter and the community leaders had previously secured. After Robert completed construction, the new seminary opened. The entire block extending from what is now Winona Avenue northward to the Pennsylvania Railroad was the location of the Cowen Seminary. It was a large two-story structure which occupied the center of that tract. It would now be 309 to 311 Detroit Street, or State Road 15. The school flourished from 1851 to 1876, and it included one of the best small libraries in the area. Many of Warsaw's older residents received the greater portion of their schooling from this seminary. Unlike the smaller district schools that preceded it, the Cowen Seminary was a private secondary school, offering its students a well-rounded classical education. An 1856 school announcement published by Jane in the local newspaper, the Northern Indianan, announced weekly lectures on the natural sciences and arts of teaching, and the curriculum also included studies in English, Latin, and algebra. The school also promised special care to furnish those coming from a distance with proper places of boarding, where they would be protected with parental care. For a quarter of a century, the Cowen Seminary was also a social educational center for the community. The first piano brought to Warsaw arrived at the Cowen Seminary on February 12, 1860. Thus, the school was able to offer music lessons. All music classes at the school were taught by Mrs. Cowen until her death. For social events, parties, and plays, desks were stacked in one corner of the room. In her diary, Semiramis Cowen, daughter of Robert and Jane, tells of one such event. Been very busy preparing for our school concert, which came off last evening. House was crowded almost to suffocation. Took out the windows, and soon they were filled. One of the school's most popular actors was Reuben Williams, who came to Warsaw in 1844 at the age of 13 and attended the school. In 1861, during the Civil War, he was elected to a lieutenant's post in the Indiana 12th Infantry Regiment of the Volunteers of the Union Army and received numerous promotions. During his military service, he was captured 3 times and was held prisoner. In 1865, Williams was promoted to brevet brigadier general for meritorious service and later returned to Warsaw to become a newspaper publisher. The Cowens and their 5 children made their residence either in the school itself or in a private home built on the property, which seems reasonable since they also offered boarding options to students who did not live within walking distance of the school. It makes sense that the Cowens would offer such boarding options, since in the 1851 letter from Baxter, which urged the Cowens to open the school in Warsaw in the first place, he notes that there are nearly 2,500 potential students within the county at the time that the Cowens built the school there. Tuition for the private school was $5 per student per 12-week term, and they had about 150 students during their busiest times. Primary classes occupied the main floor, and older pupils were upstairs. During the Civil War, the 2-story seminary may also have been used as a location to station sharpshooters. Jane was one of the leading educators of the community for nearly 25 years, and was held in the highest esteem. She died in 1876, and her daughter Semiramis may have continued to operate the school for a brief time following Jane's death, but later she moved to Silver Lake, where she became one of the first female postmasters, and eventually Semiramis returned to Warsaw and again began teaching. On November 4, 1879, the large-frame Cowen Seminary burnt to the ground. The fire supposedly started from some hot coals that were unfortunately placed near the building. According to the article documenting the building's demise, the old school building dated back to the early 1850s and for 25 years had been the home of the Select School of Warsaw. Jane Cowen's obituary notes that she was an indefatigable worker and a member of the Dorcas Society in this place. The Dorcas Society was an organization that sent very large amounts of needed supplies to the soldiers during the Civil War. Jane was also an outspoken supporter of women's rights. Writing from Logansport not long before her move to Warsaw, she cites biblical texts that show that men and women should have equal opportunities. Making special note of educational opportunities, she writes that the great evil affecting women's position is caused by men's views in the church, which are not supported by biblical texts. She goes on to say that if the church would allow women the privilege that God has given her, in both the New and the Old Testaments, an educational equal with the male sex and every right that belonged to her would follow. A 2008 review of marker text by the Indiana Historical Bureau disputes many of the claims on this particular marker and states that the site is merely of local interest and therefore would not be recommended for replacement under today's criteria for marker replacement. I respectfully disagree with the marker committee that this marker is only of local interest. Documenting history includes the lifestyles of those who lived it, and the eccentricities of an individual community or region. The Cowen Grove Seminary, Jane Dickey Cowen, and her husband Robert Cowen deserve validation. While the reviewers are correct that there are some inaccuracies in the marker, a deeper review seems to indicate that they are somewhat superficial. What is very clear is that the Cowen Grove School and the Cowen family made a significant impact in this area and the lives of its residents at a pivotal stage in early state history. Join me again soon for another edition of Indiana Roadside Markers. Until then, I'm Michael Harris. Additional information about the Cowen Grove Seminary can be found on our website at www.indianaroadsidemarkers.com. Michael L. Harris is a proud member of SAG-AFTRA, and this program was produced under a SAG-AFTRA collective bargaining agreement. Copyright 2021, all rights reserved. Indiana Roadside Markers is produced by Sastoon Media, which holds the copyright.